We're gonna wait a few more minutes, I guess, to see. We should have at least Joe joining us, so I'm gonna wait a couple more minutes. Okay, I just got an email from Joe. They're having tech issues again, so it's okay. We're gonna wait just a couple more minutes to see if we can get those worked out. Thanks for your patience, everybody.
Mayor, can you hear me? Mayor, can you hear us? Anyone? Andrew, can you hear us?
Yes,
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
I hear you.
So in the interest of time, we're going to call this subcommittee meeting to order. Why don't we go around and do our introductions? I'm Joe DeTuno. I'm the Director of Family Services, part of Connecticut's Judicial Branch, and I'm co-chair of the Offender Program Subcommittee.
Good afternoon, Johanna Canning, designee of the Acting Chief Public Defender.
And Merritt, would you like to go next?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Merritt LaJoy, Office of the Victim Advocate, and also co-chair of the subcommittee.
Andrea?
Andrew O'Connor, Family Violence Victim Advocate Program Manager at the Umbrella Center for Domestic Violence Services. I manage the court-based program for New Haven, Milford, and Derby courts.
And is that Megan? I can't see. Is that Meg?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name's Megan Scanlon, CEO at the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Apologies, I still don't have a voice, but I'm drinking tea, so it's getting a little better.
Good afternoon, Ginger.
Good afternoon. I'm Ginger Wilk. I'm the Senior Director of Reentry Services for Community Resources for Justice Family Reentry, and we run domestic violence programs in 8 different locations in the state.
And there's not a person, but it keeps. Representative Nuccio, are you there?
I am, yes. Representative Nuccio, 53rd District, Governor appointee.
Okay. So the next order of business is to go over and approve the minutes. So if we could take some time to review the minutes that Michael sent out, that'd be very helpful.
And I'll just add, these are the minutes from September 17th. That was the joint meeting. And earlier today, the arrest warrant subcommittee approved those minutes, just for everybody's, if you weren't at the first meeting.
Yeah, Ginger was the only person that wasn't.
Okay.
Correct.
So Ginger, want to take a quick look at the minutes and let us know if those meet your approval.
Yes, I looked at them a little bit this week and everything seemed fine to me, met my approval. Yes.
Okay, so since we've already voted on them once, we'll just, I guess for the record, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Just one me, I was not at the meeting, so I'll abstain from the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Merritt. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Have a-
Hi.
Do I need a second or is that good? We have so many people here in the subcommittee meeting. We don't usually have this formality. Okay, so
Over introductions of other subcommittee members, but we just put it all into one, right?
yeah, I mean, I think everyone is on our subcommittee, right? I'm not sure. So that brings us to our first recommendation that we're going to be making to the larger council. And that is that we combined this offender program subcommittee into the arrest warrant subcommittee and have it just be a court and a court subcommittee. I think that is definitely for efficiency's sake makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of the people that are typically around the table are also in that other committee. And there just seems to be a large overlap of issues and concerns. I think it just makes a whole lot of sense. So, Meg, are we going to vote on all those? Is that how this is going to roll like last?
Do you want to go recommendation by recommendation? So
Sure.
I can make a motion to approve that recommendation.
Does anyone have any objections to doing that? Do we want to have a little bit of discussion? I think given the auditor's report, some of our offender programming subcommittee is probably going to not have as much on its plate. And I think, again, combining the two while keeping those tasks and responsibilities alive and within that larger court subcommittee makes a whole lot of sense. So I think I would vote to approve that.
All right, I second the motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 The second recommendation is a little complicated because it does take the auditor's recommendation that the offender program standards subcommittee is not responsible or should never have been responsible for implementation of the standards in practice, meaning including how a provider would get on the list, and obviously monitoring and quality assurance. That shouldn't be part of what our responsibilities were. And in fact, the statute that brought forth that committee doesn't allow that. So I think that one of the recommendations need to be, how the standards are implemented. And the major recommendation of that audit was that another state entity would be responsible for that, and we would need to find that out. I think that the senators last time out were going to be convening a meeting with the Department of Public Health legislative liaisons to have an opening discussion about that. But ultimately, I think that one of the recommendations should be to determine by statute the entity that is going to be responsible for all things implementation in terms of those standards.
Yeah, I think that's right, Joe. The way I think they left it was CCDV was going to coordinate between DPH and judicial to get those legislative liaisons together to figure out what made the most sense, along with the senators in the meeting.
But our recommendation is going to be that there needs to be a
state, and to identify a state agency.
Just be a statutory change that would allow a state agency to be responsible for implementation of the DV standards in practice and we can just kind of then enumerate as much as we can the tasks that would fall under that state agency versus what the offender program standards would be, which is, making sure that they still are, best practice and those types of things. Would we want to enumerate that or just leave it as identify a state agency that would implement the DV standards moving forward?
I think we'd probably want to leave it right now as identify the appropriate state agency or agencies that would be able to implement and continue it and conduct the appropriate monitoring. Because I think that was part of the recommendation, was the need or the capacity to monitor those programs.
I mean, if a state agency took that over and would then they would have to have some sort of a contracting, whether it be full bore contracting or some memorandum of understanding or agreement that would have that state entity have the ability to, look at files and monitor practice, and that's the outcome. The other part is how those referrals are generated from the court perspective. So we just have to make sure that they're fully aware of what their whole responsibility would be.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Is that, Megan, just a point of, so are we going to write that recommendation up? Merritt and I are going to write that recommendation in a more formal way as we go down these. Is that going to be Merritt and myself doing that?
I think you can work with Liza on the language, but yeah, it'll be a more formal recommendation, and we may not necessarily have the exact state agency or agencies or however that pans out.
What I'm saying is that when we are going to present this in December, we need to have like an actual fully drafted.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. Yes.
So that's us. Okay.
Yeah, I would, and it's just a draft. Liza can help,
I'm just saying, like, so Merritt is going to write all the formal recommendations. You got that, Merritt?
Yeah, I just want to clarify the motion, because we have a motion right now, right? That the second recommendation would be a statutory change to identify the state agency that will implement the standards and conduct monitoring of programs.
Right.
Yes.
That accurately? Okay,
Yes.
okay. So that was the motion made by Megan, seconded by me.
Great.
Now,
So could I just, I'm sorry, I'm a little confused.
Sure.
Are we recommending that the legislature identify an agency, or we're recommending that we will in the future identify an agency?
I think
We
for-
will,
ahead.
we'll do the work on that. We have to do the work on that and make a recommendation to the legislature. Now, they can always change that because they have the ability to do that. But we can make what we believe is the best placement based on what the program needs are and what the capacity of the state agency is. I think Joe was alluding to the potential of DPH and possibly judicial and maybe a partnership of some sort, or maybe not, but we have to get those folks in the room to sort of talk through that.
Because what the audit was fairly clear about is we're exceeding our statutory authority. And for this to continue to go forward, before that audit report came out, we had kind of come up with a plan B that was approved by the chief state's attorney. But now that that audit report came out, that kind of has shuttled that. It might be something that's usable in the future, but for that next step that was, 6 months ago or so, even before the audit report came, now we have to kind of say, okay, we're going to start over. There has to be a state agency identified to do basically the things that we had talked about. What the mechanism of that, it's unclear. But I think at some point it has to be a state agency who takes that secondary part that the committee was doing kind of ad hoc. The third,
well, hold on, we're gonna vote on this? We didn't vote.
oh, I thought you did. I'm sorry. All in favor of putting forth that second recommendation, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Can I get a second?
It was Megan made it, I seconded it.
All right, then it's good. The third and final is language regarding the supervised diversionary program. Where I believe we had left off was an idea that there would be a training for court personnel on the supervised diversionary program, and specifically for those that commit family violence offenses. That is a step down from what we talked about last time, which was adding a suggestion or a language that would suggest to the judge or a court that they could add additional domestic violence programming as part of the supervised diversionary program order. But I think that the subcommittee, and after discussions with the larger committee last time, or we came together as a group. We were together, where we came up with the idea of possibly adding training relative to that issue. So I have some language. I did not share it. Merritt and I were kicking it around this morning. But there could be some language that we put in as a recommendation that potentially could be a statutory addition. I think we just need to clean that up a little bit.
Joe,
So-
do you want me to send that out to everybody?
It's really up to you. I think, Merritt, what I'd like to do is maybe just talk with our public defender representative, just to make sure that is, instead of doing it in right now and having to read it for the first time, why don't we just table that? And the recommendation is going to be that there will be a training for members, and I'm assuming it's going to be hosted by the Chief State's Attorney's Office, where they're going to talk about supervised diversionary program. They're going to talk about, for domestic violence offenders and, focusing on offender accountability, victim safety. And that might be the first iteration of trying to address that issue and see if we can make some headway there and address some of the concerns that were voiced last year when we first tackled this recommendation.
I guess I didn't realize that the statutory language from last year was off the table. I thought the issue was people didn't agree on the language, and it came down to a couple members of this council going and lobbying against that bill. So I don't know why we're not just looking at that and looking at ways that we can agree on that language moving forward, as in addition to the training.
I think because there was not consensus at the time when we talked about adding the language of the court may consider at the time of supervised diversionary order.
Yeah, but we have the time now, and like
Right.
we just put in the new process of going to the legislative liaison. So, and we already have draft language from last year that it's my understanding again that a couple members of this council killed in the last minute, but it was going to run through judiciary. And I have some emails from the chair that communicates that from the chair of judiciary. So I don't know why we're not revisiting the language and coming up with something we can all agree on.
So I think even that soft language of having a court considering it was not agreed to. So I'm not sure what.
Yeah, but I guess the opportunity is we have time to agree on it. It was voted on last year in the full council and everybody voted, as far as I understand it, for it. And then it was just, except for Johanna, she abstained on that part, but everybody else voted for it. So I guess I'm just wondering why we can't do both this year.
I agree with Megan. You know, we had language, so if there's something that is people don't like about the language, then let's work on it.
I'm not, you're not. Representative, I don't think it's the language per se. I think the language is probably as innocuous as possible. It is just literally at the time of the order, a judge can contemplate that. I mean, that was the recommendation last year. We haven't changed that recommendation. The issue wasn't the language or what we put forth. It was how, after the fact, that was changed dramatically. It left the court at the time of disposition, and it made it, the bill really made it, probation's determination on whether that happens, which wasn't ever contemplated at our level. So that recommendation still is viable. But if we don't have consensus, and we went to kind of a plan B, which is kind of a statutory responsibility for a training by the Chief State's Attorney's Office for members of the criminal justice system about supervised diversionary program, and especially when it involves a case of family violence. So I think maybe we should think about a two-pronged approach and have both of those recommendations be put forth. I don't, is it just going to be, I mean, are we just going to vote on it? And if somebody doesn't agree on it, then we're just going to.
Yeah, I guess the whole point of us having the discussion at the full council was that if we're going to have statutory recommendations, then you get all your legislative liaisons this time together and you come up with an agreement on the language. I think the issue last year is that folks, said that, oh, we didn't agree on this language. Now that doesn't change the fact that language can change as representatives and senators see those bills and change the language. That we can't account for that. But what we can account for is that the legislative liaisons get together, look at the language and agree upon it, which the majority did last year. And I think the issue was then, it went through the legislative process. So I don't see why we can't do both. I didn't come away from that last meeting thinking that we weren't doing both.
I'd like to also understand for the people who lobbied against it, what was objectionable. So, that's the whole point of this, right? Unfortunately, I have to do this all the time, like it or not. You have to negotiate. If the majority of the council voted yes on this, and there were a couple of people who didn't like it, well, let's hash it out then. That's the job.
No, I don't disagree with you, but I think when we're talking about generating some recommendations for the larger council to consider, we kind of went to a plan B because it seemed as though that might be the path to agreement. And the idea of the issue, I guess, in a nutshell, is that supervised diversionary program is really a mental health diversion. And many of the people who are going to ask the court for this diversion may or may not have the capacity to do a batterer intervention program.
Right,
And
but the language last year, Joe, was once they were evaluated to have the stability in terms of their mental health, that they should then be
And go
enrolled
through the
in
program,
the
exactly.
family violence intervention. So it was not, we were not dismissing the fact that there's some people that have severe mental health conditions that can't do the program. We were just simply stating in the language, and I'm summarizing, that if and when they were evaluated to be stabilized, and that it was appropriate that they would then enter the family violence intervention programs.
our recommendation was even softer than that. Our recommendation was a judge could consider it. That was our original recommendation. What you're referring to is kind of what happened after the fact. But I think our recommendation was very kind of, a judge could order additional domestic violence treatment if the case so, if the judge thought that was what was necessary in that case. The objections came from the idea of the program is specialized, and you might want to bring forth your objections instead of me kind of parroting your
Yeah,
recommendations.
let's jump in here.
Or-
So generally, and I think I spoke at this at length the last meeting. Generally, I am a big fan of the supervised diversionary program as it stands right now. I think it's probably the best program that we have out there. It protects our most vulnerable communities, and it is onerous. And we had Mr. LaPlante go through exactly what somebody on the supervised diversionary program has to go through. And it is much more onerous than any other program out there. So, and one of the reasons I questioned him so carefully on that is because I wanted to make it clear that this is not a workaround. This is not a way of getting out of treatment or getting away from, any specific treatment or getting away from something. This is something where you are reporting to probation twice a month on top of doing all of your programming, which is often partial hospitalization 3 times a week, 4 hours a day, 3 times a week, on top of meeting with your probation officer. So this is an onerous program that's specifically dedicated to helping our most vulnerable people who may not even necessarily reach, although by statute and technically they reach the standard of a Family Violence Act. They may not technically be the traditional sort of DV offender whose underlying issue is power and control. Oftentimes, when you're talking about the supervised diversionary program, which has a high standard in order to enter the program, oftentimes when you're talking about that, you're talking about people who have paranoid schizophrenia, schizoaffective bipolar, those sorts of things where it's not a power and control situation so much as they are delusional and need medication and therapy to stay on track. So that's sort of an overview of the program and why it's so great as it is. The more you tinker with a program like that, the more trouble you're going to encounter within the programming. And specifically with some of the language, now the language changed several times throughout the course of the legislative session last year. I got to see some of it as it was coming through. So it was an evolving, ongoing thing. But specifically, some of the issues that I saw that kept coming up over and over was when you're dealing with a population that is so severely impacted by their mental health. And the statute says in order to be qualified for this program, your mental health has to have a substantial impact on your ability to function in society. So we're talking about people who who really have trouble getting along in society because of their mental illness. There was nothing in the language that stated either like what happens under the different circumstances. What happens if somebody is a complete success in the mental health, but they fail at the domestic? What if they are a success at the domestic, but they fail at the mental health? What if they are borderline on the mental health, not at all attending the domestic? Who is saying that they are failing? Who is providing the treatment for somebody who's so severely mentally ill that they have to be in a partialized hospital program? Who is providing the domestic violence treatment to them? They have to be able to work specifically with these people. Now, probation does have mental health officers. These are specific officers who've gone through training to work with people who have mental health illness, but they're not providing programming. And they also probably, and I think Joe would agree with this, should not be the ones to determine whether or not they are successful in the specific programming. They hear back from the provider and then mark it as successful or not successful. They're not actually doing the providing. So there's a lot of issues with putting that language together. I mean, overall, we're tinkering with something that doesn't necessarily need to be tinkered with, especially if we're going to do something like training. I think training solves a lot of the problem. If the problem is that people are getting placed in a supervised diversionary program and they don't necessarily belong in that program, then that's a training issue because the program is good as it stands. If people aren't successfully completing the supervised diversionary program, yet somehow their case is going away, then that's a problem with training because the program is good as it stands. If you just follow the programming, the right people are funneled to supervised diversionary program and the real offenders are funneled differently. So that's some of the issues that I saw. There were so many different versions that we'd have to go through the language specifically. But that's some of the issues that I saw coming up as they were popping up.
I think at the end of the day, the council did vote on the initial language. Now, again, we can't change what happens through the legislative process. Again, I'm not saying the supervised diversionary program is not a good program. I guess what I'm saying is if there's a family violence charge and the supervised diversionary, like you said, the healthcare or the mental health provider says they are stable, I don't see a reason why they shouldn't then go through one of Ginger's programs, which is monitored. They contract with CSSD and address the family violence issue. Because we're also talking about, in some cases, they are repeat family violence offenders. So I think that's the issue from our perspective. And I guess I would just add that those being impacted by family violence are the most vulnerable. I appreciate that some of the offenders are also vulnerable, but those being impacted by those acts would be, in my opinion, the most vulnerable people that we're trying to help here.
I think we were clear when we first started forming this recommendation a year ago, is that we always thought that had to be a determination by a judge at the time of time of the plea bargain or when the case is being disposed, where the state's attorney's there, the person's representatives are there, and the judge makes that order at the time of the actual putting that person in the program, not a secondary step, because it just creates a lot of issues for us, especially for probation and others. So if a judge at the time of ordering that program thinks that domestic violence treatment is something that should be ordered, then they have that ability to do so. And that is really what the language that really Shauna first as the co-chair from a CCADV perspective came forth with. And from there, it just kind of rolled down the hill. So
so I guess what I'm saying is we can put forth the same language, and if folks work together instead of killing bills, I think we can actually pass something that's productive.
So Megan, in that case, should we set up a meeting where we just specifically go over this language that we want to discuss and have the legislative the you know who I'm talking about, the researchers and stuff here, the legislative aides, to go over it so we can kind of go through it, fine tooth it, and then bring it back to through the committee for a vote. Because I'm with you on this 100%. So I think we have to look at this across the board, especially repeat offenders, and the absolute most vulnerable here are the people who are being abused. There are secondary levels of people who, again, have vulnerabilities that I think we can take care of, but I liked what we had last year. I'm kind of a little upset I didn't know that it was talked about being killed in that, because I definitely would have stepped in and got more involved with Judish to kind of bring forward at least some sort of negotiation rather than just killing it. So how do we proceed to take the language that we had, the concerns that people had, and have a work group to sit down and figure out what the language needs to look like before we get into the next session?
Yeah, I think we can take the language that we recommended last time, representative, and then have the legislative liaisons all meet like we talked about with other statutory changes. And then I think it's just a matter of staying in communication with each other, and in communication with you and the other representatives and senators on the council.
I'm good with that. If you would like, I'll gladly be in any of the meetings to kind of understand fully what's going on and what's happening with the liaisons and such. But if we want to set something like that up, I'm all for it.
Okay, sounds good.
Now, I'm not sure what is our role. I mean, what are we?
So I think you just have to make a motion to reintroduce the language that was approved by the full council from last report, along with your training recommendation.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm opposed because I have not had the opportunity to review that language in over a year. And I need to take it to my chief to go over this language.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure whether it's the language that we created.
It's the language from the report. We published the report. It's public. It's the report language that we all voted on and
We
agreed to.
had statutory language that we worked on that wasn't the language that showed up in the bill.
But we're not talking about the bill. That session is over. That bill is dead. We're talking about reintroducing the recommendation that we put forth in our report last year. We're not talking about any bills.
Are we
It's
talking
just
about
to start again.
Correct.
Are we talking about the statutory language that our subcommittee worked on? Or are we just talking about the recommendation of that we just had it was one of the 13 that we did as a big committee?
We're talking about the subcommittee worked on the language and put it in the full council report. We all voted on that report and it was published as a recommendation. So we're talking about that.
As well as the recommendation for training.
As
Yeah.
well as the recommendation for training. So that would be the additional piece of it. So I think we
Okay.
got all in favor except for Johanna. Joe, have you voted?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what we're talking about. That's all. And Liza, I'm fine. Liza clarified, so I approve.
Okay, great.
I would just like to say I'm getting a little uncomfortable with taking votes on language that we don't have in front of us. I did send.
Non-statutory. We're not talking, we'll start anew with creating active statutory language based on the recommendation that was in the report last year. So we'll start from scratch.
It's the same recommendation we had before.
So the vote is that we're gonna talk some more.
No, the vote is that we're taking the language from the last year's recommendation and we're gonna put that forth as a recommendation again. We're gonna add training to that. And we would have to just pretend there was no statute last year, pretend like session didn't happen. There's literally no statutory language. And we'd all have to work together on what that statutory language looks like.
It's that like one liner that we put into when we voted in December and that everyone agreed to. After that, it kind of went downhill. She's just talking about the very kind of the recommendation that we did that everyone agreed to back in December. If you remember, we came and it was, I'll show it to you.
Okay.
It's not.
Just for the
The
record,
rest of
I
it
am
is not-
uncomfortable with taking votes on anything that we don't have in front of us. If in the future.
I mean,
we-
it's
work.
online, you could pull it up. It's exactly the language that we all agreed to last year.
I understand, but we're in the meeting right now, and that was a year ago. So I'm just saying, I'm objecting for that reason, and if we could just prevent that from happening again in the future, if we can work on getting people to look at things that they should look at a couple of weeks in advance, that would be helpful. Otherwise, I wouldn't necessarily have to object or abstain from everything.
Okay, that's a good recommendation for the co-chairs.
Merritt and I are going to put these recommendations to writing. My hope is we circulate all those recommendations before the December meeting of the full council so that our subcommittee can look at them, make sure that that's something that they can agree to. And, but you're going to voice your objections at the December meeting versus I don't think we're changing the recommendations that we talk about here today. It doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to, in the larger council, or even before, to talk about what your concerns are. But at the December meeting, we're going to vote on whatever they are. Is that correct, Megan?
Yes.
So Merritt and I will put pen to paper, hopefully soon. I think we have a bunch of meetings coming up, Merritt, where we'll probably be in the same room. Maybe we'll just connect and add some time and just do that. But I imagine you're already working on them. So that helps us tremendously. So we want to give at least a couple of weeks. Definitely by the time Darren Mitchell comes, we'll have those public for you to look at, for all the subcommittee members to look at. Those are the three main areas and the main recommendations that I have. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to put forward as a potential recommendation that we haven't talked about?
No.
Any other business?
Anything else you want to talk about?
I have one quick question. Since we're merging this with the arrests and warrants, because I was on arrest and warrants and now it's merged. So is this the new main meeting, or because I literally just had an arrest and warrants meeting right before this?
So we, Representative, what we tried to do last time was just to see how it would flow. I think we had like back-to-back meetings, just like we had today. When we needed to do a separate meeting this time because we still are a subcommittee that has to make recommendations. And so that's why we broke this one out. Our hope is that once this iteration of our council is complete and the recommendations are final, one of the recommendations that we're going to have moving forward is that the two subcommittees merge. So that's going to be next year in 2026. It'll just be, hopefully, if it's approved by the larger council, one subcommittee that just takes over just court issues. And that would probably be not until then, but we still have work to do as a subcommittee because we really haven't been, those responsibilities haven't been taken away from us. Does that make sense?
I think so, yes. Thank you.
The other two things that Merritt and I have been tackling, just in terms of our subcommittee, that there are not going to be any legislative recommendations, but what we can share, Merritt and I met last week, and I was able to get from the Court Support Services Division, from my Business Intelligence Unit, a pretty significant dump of data for the Family Violence Education Program. And Merritt and I went through it, and we were looking for areas where we might be able to strengthen or do some other things, maybe legislatively. And I'll let Merritt talk about that data because, you know, obviously I work for CSSD, so I don't want to be the person to talk about that. But you know, I did share that with Merritt. And I just want to give her an opportunity just to talk about what she saw. And Merritt, do you mind doing that? I'm sorry I put you on the spot, bud.
I know, no problem. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that came out of it was with the changes to the Family Violence Education Program statutes, the inclusion of risk of injury, we haven't seen any great increase in those applications from the data. So there wasn't anything alarming that, you know, that directed us towards that. So that was interesting, you know, and additionally, a lot of the majority of Family Violence Education Program referrals are misdemeanors, not felonies. That was another big portion of the data that we looked at. I don't know, as I'm looking at it. We're gonna share this, right, Joe?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm just, if anybody has questions, that might be better because
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the things that we looked at was, you know, how individuals with different levels of risk, how they did in the program. We looked at timeliness, how long it took people to get into the program, how long it took them to complete the program. And, you know, just like, you know, other larger research projects have shown is that, you know, people that go through the Family Violence Education Program, the vast majority of them complete successfully, over 80%, 8 out of 10. The recidivism rate for a new arrest 12 months after completion is really low. Across all risk categories, it's about 11 or 12%. You know, again, as Merritt said, most of the individuals that go through the program, their most serious charge is a misdemeanor. You know, that was off the top of my head, I think it was 60% or 70% combined. We looked at how many cases were referred to the Family Violence Education Program outside of family services. So the division that I oversee, we deal with first and second time offenders. And we wanted to make sure that, you know, typically the people that go to the program, you know, do so as quickly as possible and don't have serious charges. And that bore out. The people that asked the judge to grant the program outside of family services, it was a very low number. It was like 400. And I think we were looking at a data set of about 4,000 defendants. Those 300 and some odd cases, they actually participated in the program, completed very similarly to the other more low risk individuals, and the recidivism rate wasn't higher. So I think that, you know, we were looking at whether there was gaps in the system. You know, obviously there was a piece of legislation that came out in 24 that increased the level of charges that were allowed into the Family Violence Education Program. I know several of people around the table objected to that legislation. And we asked that it, you know, be put to the council, but it passed. And, you know, not only did risk of injury charges be included, which are felonies, but also serious physical injury cases were also involved. So I'm not sure that, you know, we're going to make recommendations that are going to change legislation. I don't think that it was a brand new legislation that came out in 24. So Merritt and I were just kind of looking at the trends. It seemed very positive. And, you know, when I can certainly present that or have someone from CSSD present that to the larger council. I think it's interesting information.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I think one of the things that we may want to look at coming out of this is the number of referrals it took sometimes for people to complete the program. That was interesting. And I know that that's a big complaint of crime victims that if somebody is rearrested or gets a second referral, they don't complete it, they give them another chance. I know that's been a concern in the past that I've heard from victims that re-referring somebody over and over again.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting.
The other thing that we were tasked with as part of our legislative mandate is to look at the Department of Corrections and what family violence or intimate partner violence treatment that they have within the facilities. Merritt and I were able to get on a Teams call with Department of Corrections. They're going to send us their curriculum, their outcomes, all the things that we asked of them. And Merritt and I will be reviewing that information for report. So that's on the docket, right? And we're working on that. That's another thing that we'll bring to the subcommittee when we finish our analysis. I mean, I'm not a researcher, nor is Merritt, but we'll look at it to make sure that it looks like best practice. It follows a lot of the DV standards. I think that's really what we're going to be focusing on. And obviously, I'm interested in outcomes and those types of things.
Can I just go back to FEP for a minute, Joe? So I definitely am very interested in seeing that data and those statistics, and I'm glad it's positive. I will just say from a provider standpoint, we're definitely seeing a number of referrals that are slipping through that would not be deemed appropriate for FEP. We're seeing people with multiple victims. We're seeing people who have violated protective orders getting referred to FEP. We're definitely, 3 times through, and I know that there is data about that, sometimes it does 3 times as a charm and people do end up successfully completing. So I know that that's part of it as well. We've seen strangulation, suffocation. So and this is something I've reported to our contract monitor, and we're flagging them and so forth and so on. But I just think that a lot of it is that there's just been a lot of changes in the different courts. There's some new staff, I think it's just like anything, there's trends. And it seems as though FEP is kind of becoming more of like the default program. And rather than kind of looking, and this is just from where I sit, right? It's not, I don't know all the ins and outs of what's happening there, but I will say that I've had, staff come to me with like, you've got to be kidding me, Ginger. Like, this is an FEP referral, you know what I mean? And so we'll bounce it back and say, hey, this person seems to be more appropriate for Explore or Evolve or whatever. And the answer is, well, it didn't go through family. You know what I mean? It was something that came directly from the state's attorney and X, Y, and Z. So having said that, I definitely think that there needs to be a good hard look at the FEP referrals, because I also see a rapid increase in FEP referrals and a decrease in the other higher risk programs like Explore and Evolve. And so that's why I'm saying it just seems like it's kind of okay. It's easy. It's 9 weeks. And what terrifies me is that we're talking about a 9-week session. We're talking about a program that has 22 clients in it, right? And we have great facilitators that are really highly trained in years in being able to, target what needs to be targeted and really apply the materials. But you would have to be a magician in order to get deep enough into the lives of what's happening with these 22 individuals to make sure that you're catching some of the trends and paying attention. I mean, you just don't do a deep enough dive in FEP. As great of a staff person that you are, it's not a deep enough dive for people who've had violations of protective orders and some of these more serious charges. We've had people that have stabbed somebody in public in front of a camera, like, some of these things. Again, when you look at it statistically, I'm sure it's a small percentage when you look at all of them, but it's still happening. So I definitely have some concerns and really think that we need to take a good hard look at sort of like these referral trends and making sure that there's some standards, that go along with it. So
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a statute that, prohibits certain crimes from being put in the FEP, but, sitting with Merritt, she's no joke, right? I mean, she's tough, and, we went over all the data, and actually we had we were able to look at the percentage of referrals for different types of crimes. So all the crimes that were FEP, the most serious charge, were in a list, and the ones that were the most were risk of injury to a child, which is allowable. And the others were, less than 10% of what we saw. I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but I know that Merritt and I were looking at it, and I think she assumed, as maybe I did too, is that some of those more serious cases were going to be in that data set. And again, we don't know what charges are subbed by the prosecutor. We don't know what good cause is put before a judge, which is allowable for some of the crimes. If you look at the 2024 legislative changes, it allows more serious crimes to be considered. So again, without knowing all that, I think that when I had Merritt take a look at the data, I wanted her, from a victim, advocate perspective, to take a look at it to see if anything that she looked at was, out of character, or things that we could really, hang our hat on, for lack of a better word. And really, I think what we found is that the vast majority of the referrals, were really those that should have been in the family violence education program from a pure perspective. But once you end up allowing other types of charges and other things, you're going to have more serious cases in that data set. There's just no way around it.
Yeah.
And good cause is not defined anywhere. So, I've literally heard, a defense attorney say, my client misses his children as good cause. I mean, that's hard to control. From any, we can put all kinds of standards in the statutes that we want, but when you have good cause in there, that opens it up tremendously to whatever is happening at that moment in the courtroom.
But again, A, B, and C felonies there's no good cause for. So, there's certainly those areas where a judge and prosecutor don't have that discretion. But, without question, there were some serious cases and charges in that data set. Again, these are things that we can replicate. Again, we had to use a little bit older data because we wanted the recidivism, which is a year out from conviction. So, we can look at different things, but as long as we have the data, I mean, I think we want to look at what our statutory responsibility within this committee was. And I think that, looking at the data and really about the eligibility of the program, I think a lot of that was taken out of our hands by a really recent statute. I'm not sure what we can do relative to that issue, other than look at the data and see if there was really anything that really popped out or that was glaring, something that we needed to at least address from that perspective.
Okay. And what were the dates of the data that you looked at, Merritt?
2003. I mean, 2023, sorry.
Okay. I was going to say, geez.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you.
Because the data wouldn't have been available beyond that. So
yeah, I mean, we need recidivism data, and we need to give the sample, and that's very consistent with how we look at other types of situations. Now, when that request was made, again, we could probably start looking at 2024 data as a comparison, but I don't think you're going to see much change, to be quite honest with you. I mean, there's a whole year, it's 4,000 cases of individuals that got referred to FEP. So not that we won't do it, but, again, we were looking for those major things that we could really, make recommendations on, and we didn't find it. And just an editorial, I mean, I think the purpose of the council is what Merritt and I did. We sat down, we know what the issues are, we looked at the data, and, we're not rushing to make legislative changes. We're not rushing to do anything. We're looking at kind of what's happening in the system, looking at the data to see what is resonating, what isn't, with an eye toward change. I think that's really what I'm the judicial branch. I'm their representative. I'm showing the Office of the Victim Advocate Complaint Officer our data in collaboration, right? I'm not hiding anything. Here it is. Take a look at it. And, she and I were able to look at it and, have conversation about different points about the individuals who are referred. And it was kind of refreshing. And from a Merit's perspective, I hope she gained something as much as I did out of it, because we had a great conversation. Is it ultimately going to lead to some major changes? Probably not. But I think we looked at that data from the same lens, which, that was always kind of our hope on this council, is that we would be able to look at things and inspect things and brainstorm around things that, are difficult and they're not easy, but we do it in collaboration with the hopes of making change when we see it, and not making change for change's sake. Okay, that is the end of our business. Hearing that no one has others, I'm going to motion to adjourn.
Do we have a next meeting date?
Michael, what's the next meeting date, bud?
November 19th.
November 19th, Representative. Do you have, we sent that to everybody, right? Did we send I thought we sent the.
One yet.
Michael's going to send it to everybody that is on the council, Representative, to give you the time and date. Is that okay? Okay. Thank you all. Have a good day.